Hi, this is a quick revision of War Photographer by Duffy. First of all, a point that Duffy made about the poem itself. Those photographs are in the background, but I'm more interested in the photographer, in the dilemma of someone who has that as a job, to go to these places and come back with the images. So it's this dilemma of being in a particular situation where there is horror all around and your job is to record that horror, not to necessarily engage with it, but to bring the images back. And it's that contrast, that dilemma that Duffy explores throughout the poem. First of all, a quick look at the structure. It's written in regular sestets, and the rhyme scheme's also very regular. We've got an A, B, B, C, D, D scheme running all the way through the poem. And you could argue that that order is an order that imposes a sense of regularity and order out of the chaos of war, that these photographs and the photographer himself, as well as the editor, are imposing some kind of structure, trying to generate some kind of meaning out of the meaningless. If we take a look at the first stanza. In his darkroom he is finally alone. Already there's an implied contrast. He's alone, whereas before he was involved in massive activity. With spools of suffering set out in ordered rows, we can hear the sibilance running through that line, with spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. And if we hadn't picked up the sense of order from the structure just yet, the fact that ordered is used, plus that's reinforced by the regularity of the sibilance, once again gives us a sense of that imposing of regularity, of order, of structure. The only light is red and softly glows. Well, the red light's the safe light on the dark room, but it's also again imposing a sense of contrast. This is a light that softly glows. That adverb's providing the contrast to the kind of lights and illumination, the fires, the napalm, etc., of a horrific war location. And then Duffy moves into this extended simile of the photographer as a kind of priest, as though this were a church and he a priest preparing to intone a mass. Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, all flesh is grass. Well, we've got to think, I suppose, first of all, why use that simile? And it certainly suggests a reverence, a care for the images that have been taken. If the war photographer did not get involved in the horror, then it's their duty to convey that horror to the readers, to try and produce some kind of sympathy or empathy in those that actually see them. So the images are precious, and that precious devotion is exemplified by treating them as if they are sacred. So becoming the priest in this context is entirely appropriate. Preparing to intone a mass is important because this seems to be the mass. There's a litany of horror. Beirut, Belfast, sorry about the inversion there, Phnom Penh, these are all places associated with war. It's also interesting that certainly the first two are holophrastic, and I would argue, maybe dodgily, that the holophrastic sentences fix these places, perhaps like the chemicals in the solution fix the images. Certainly we don't have any second thoughts about the kind of connotations that these places hold. Particularly for when this was written, Belfast, Beirut, these were places that would immediately be associated with war. It ends with making sure that we get this concrete link to the litany, all flesh is grass, this fairly famous statement from Isaiah 46, which is generally read as being an explanation or a treatment of the transitory nature of humanity, that people die, that's it, this happens. So it fits perfectly well with the recording of the horror and the easy passing of life in war zones. Also would suggest that the caesura that's used here slows the pace right down, rather like the mass, and again that could reinforce the kind of reverence that's being shown to the material. Next stanza, he has a job to do. Solutions slop in trays. You could argue that solutions is ambiguous. Clearly, if you take it literally, the solution is the chemical solution that's being used to fix the image in the darkroom. But it could equally be solutions to war, And the fact that they slop suggests a casualness, a carelessness that's associated with it. There are no neat and easy solutions. This is a messy situation. Then we move into a direct comparison between the places where war takes place and rural England, which seems as far away from that as possible. It's not just England, it is rural England. It's been modified so we have this sense of the idyllic retreat. Home again to ordinary pain, which simple weather can dispel. This is really superfluous stuff. This is like an aches and pains. It's nothing in comparison to the kind of horror that's experienced in the war zone. To fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. Well, we have again that image of rural England and its idyll, where children will go running across fields, but it's contrasted to the horror of the situation perhaps in Vietnam, perhaps in Beirut, perhaps in Phnom Penh, where we have the situation where children's innocence, the fun of childhood, could ultimately end up in death and horror. Something is happening. Stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes. Again, on the literal level, the photograph's being developed, so it's gradually starting to appear. The features aren't quite visible yet. They start to twist. We can't ignore the fact that a face starting to twist suggests a contorting of pain, a half-formed ghost. This metaphor, again, suggests the image that's just gradually coming into focus, but also it's connoting death, a half-formed ghost. Finally, 100 Agonies in Black and White. Again, we can go for black and white as being a reference to the image, the photograph, but it could also play on the contrasts that the photographer feels with regard to war. The contrast between good and evil, the contrast between truth and falsehood. Is what's being recorded by the photographer truly the nature of what's being seen, given that it is a process of selection? And that process of selection is reinforced in the next line, from which his editor will pick out 5 or 6. The photographer may have taken hundreds of images. The editor just selects the ones they want to use, the ones that will be most appropriate for conveying the message of the piece that's being written, not necessarily the ones that truly capture what's taken place. It demeans and trivialises the experience because 5 or 6 images can't possibly hope to convey the nature of the war. The reader's eyeballs prick with tears between the bath and pre-lunch beers. Once again, demeans and trivialises. The people who are actually looking at these images, yes, their eyes are pricked with tears, yes, they're moved, but they're moved only momentarily. Between the bath and pre-lunch beers, the kind of luxurious life they're living in rural England is a massive contrast. It's so removed, it's so distant from this war that they're not affected in any meaningful way. And the war photographer feels that. From the aeroplane, he stares impassively at where he earns his living, and they do not care. There's a suggestion that these images, rather than moving and affecting change, actually perhaps are used for a form of schadenfreude, a form of entertainment, a form of seeing the suffering of others and therefore feeling better about ourselves. Okay, thanks.